Women and children often make up the most vulnerable members of Australia's Muslim community, as they do the broader society.
While the disadvantaged and underprivileged exist across genders, when you are young or a woman, the challenge becomes so much greater.
Whether it be the sister who has been a victim of domestic violence and been forced to flee her home,
or a widow who has no financial support once her husband has passed,
or an orphan child whose future is bleak without a father or parent figure,
or refugee children whose families cannot afford to send them to Quran school to learn the Book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
We see all these cases every week in our work at National Zakah Foundation, and we see every single day the difference your zakah helps make to these cases involving women and children.
Zakat is that pillar of Islam that instills hope for a better future for the most vulnerable in our community through the taqwa of Allah and love of one's brothers and sisters.
It came to empower disadvantaged members of the Muslim Ummah throughout the ages and to change their situation sustainably and decisively.
Such as allowing the sister impacted by domestic violence to stand on her feet again and build a future of dignity and hope.
and by giving the orphan a beautiful foster family to look after them so they can have the opportunities other children do.
And by giving support to every family and child to be able to learn the Quran the way it should be recited.
And this is the power of NZF's work in our local community. It's not only providing band-aid solutions for problems, but rather transforming people's lives to the better.
This Ramadan, help us build towards our vision of a Muslim community where no one is left behind, especially our vulnerable women and children, because your zakat today is helping change their tomorrow.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brothers and sisters. Welcome to yet another episode of
Talk series for Ramadan 2022. It is an absolute pleasure to have you here today. My name is Faraz, in case you are tuning in for the first time, and it is a great delight of ours to welcome you to tonight's show. Hope you've had a great day's fasting wherever you are watching, whether locally, internationally, interstate, or otherwise, and that you've had a great chance to do your iftar for the day by yourself or with your family. Pray tarawih, that's your thing, and to join us for what should be a very interesting conversation after all that. Tonight we're looking at a topic which is long overdue in my view. It is something that when we talk about getting real, it is one of the problems in our community, that we are often bought in, pun intended, to all sorts of interesting and wonderful approaches when it comes to our money, and some of the traps that takes us down. So we'll be talking about all things finance, investment, Islamic finance, and the many wonderful fads and trends that we see emerge in the community, as it were. Now, to those of us joining for the first time, just a little bit about National Zakat Foundation and the Real Talk series. So NZF Australia, National Zakat Foundation Australia, is the Australian branch of the international Muslim NGO that seeks to empower the Muslim community through the blessing and potential of zakat right here locally. So it takes people's zakat, which they need to pay, and channels it back in to people who are eligible and valid recipients of zakat in a local context within Western countries. NZF exists in 5 countries, about to launch in a 6th, which is very exciting, and we'll bring you that soon, inshallah. But in those countries that it operates in, it seeks to channel the blessing and potential of zakat back into its local communities. And it is now in its 7th year of operation, mashallah, and has recently reached the milestone of $10 million worth of zakat, Australian dollars, powered back into the local Muslim community to help people like widows, victims of domestic violence, people who classify as being, from the Islamic definition viewpoint, poor and therefore valid recipients of zakat. So NZF has initiated this series of conversations called Real Talk, where we look at important issues to do with the community's well-being overall. A couple of nights ago, we had an episode on marriage and all things related to problems that happen in marriage, which went very, very well. And here we are today talking about another very important aspect of our community's overall life, and that, of course, is all things financial well-being. Now, I've got here today with me two very, very esteemed guests, and there could be few people better qualified to be speaking on these topics than these two brothers. What I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce each of them and have them tell us a little bit about themselves, because they've got a long and storied career, each of them in their respective fields, and they really come from a position of authority when it comes to this particular issue, and I'm really looking forward to picking their brains on some of those topics. I'll start with Brother Chaaban, Omran, here to my left in the studio. To many of the community, he will need little introduction. He has been something of a father figure in the Islamic finance space. But Brother Chaaban, welcome to the show. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
And in a nutshell, tell us a little bit about your experience when it comes to this space.
Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalam ala rasulillah. Jazakallah khair for inviting me to the Real Talk 22. So my background, just very quickly, I'm the former managing director of MCCA. I steered it through the global financial crisis. The former CEO of Crescent Wealth, superannuation, and I'm currently the Chief Executive Officer of Healthbridge Investments. I have a diploma in financial planning. I've got a degree with a double major in economics and finance, and I've worked for big companies like MLC, IOOF, and I'm here to share some thoughts about Islamic finance and just wealth management in general.
Jazakallah khair, brother. And Brother Sulaiman, joining us from Doha, mashallah, the other side of the world. Brother, welcome. It is an absolute pleasure to have you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself and give our audience a 101 on who Sulaiman Moolla is.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulullah. I'm so glad and honored to be here today. Thank you for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. Just to give you a very short background about who I am, in a nutshell, I'm an Islamic banker. I've worked in the industry now for the best part of 18 years, worked across multiple asset classes and geographies. I've been in the Middle East for the last 15 years or so, structuring, distributing Islamic finance product, really with the main purpose and objective of financial inclusion, empowerment and literacy, primarily amongst Muslim communities. I've got an undergraduate degree in physics, and I've got a master's degree in Islamic finance. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. Pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Jazakallah khair, Brother Sulaiman. It's a real pleasure to have you here. So, gents, I'm going to jump straight in, inshallah. And with many of these questions, please feel free to jump in as well. I know there's a little bit of a time lag on our stream to Brother Sulaiman, but to the extent that you can, Brother Sulaiman, feel free to cut off Chaaban. Chaaban, feel free to jump in without being rude, of course. But we really want this to be an open exchange where each of you are sort of, hopping in where you feel fit. But I will, in most cases, start with one of you and then pass it over to the other for commentary, inshallah.
Sure.
The first thing I want to start with is the general level of education and awareness in your experience when it comes to all things, finance and financial matters in the Muslim community. Brother Chaaban, you've been in this field a long time. How do you feel our community is? Where are we at when it comes to, financial literacy, I suppose, as a very general firm?
Yeah, look, it's a very complex topic. Let's not make any mistake about this. So certainly, if we were to segment the community, so you've got our brothers, you've got the sisters as well, and then you've got the young within our community. So I think the brothers have a fairly good grasp of the finances and financial services. I think the sisters are yearning to know more about finance in general. We can talk about that a little bit later on, but I do believe that the sisters probably present the biggest opportunity for them to increase their knowledge. They're interested in financial literacy, and unfortunately some of the brothers can get themselves into trouble. They do sometimes, without doing their homework, they do get themselves into trouble by getting to products and investments that they probably don't do much homework on. And the young people, the young people are born in the digital age. So they will just jump straight into things like cryptocurrencies and anything new. But at least all of them are attempting to understand financial literacy. I think they've improved a lot. But we also have things like superannuation that's probably misunderstood, investments that have been misunderstood. But then again, that's why we're here, to try to cover that a little bit more.
Brother Sulaiman, you come from I guess a different part of the world, but you have been in the United Kingdom. I know you've not been there for a while, but you know, we say in many regards the UK community is, you know, our older cousin, and whatever happens there about 20 years ago eventually happens here. What was your experience when you left the UK to go to the Middle East, of, you know, the general sort of I guess state of the Muslim community vis-a-vis all things Islamic finance, especially given the fact that the community is sort of ahead of us in terms of when Muslims got there and settled there. So what was the level of maturity? What did you see? And, you know, what can you tell us at the highest level? And I guess maybe compare and contrast that with what you see in a Muslim country where, I guess, you know, Muslims are settled there. It's their land in many ways, even though the sort of the governance systems that we see perhaps are you know, a bit of a hybrid of everything else that's going on in the world, and may not be as classically Islamic as we may ideally want. What would you say in that regard? What are some of the interesting distinctions that you're seeing living in the Gulf?
So look, if we look at the UK experience, we look at the British experience, I think if we look at communities that effectively live as minorities, especially the Muslim community in the UK, when they arrived in the 60s and 70s, they had very different priorities. They were, the priorities were about putting food on the table, making sure they had roofs over their heads, going to work, going to whatever their jobs were, and making sure that the families were catered for, either the families in the UK or families back home in the areas of the world that they migrated from. Over the past 20 years or so, I'd say there's been quite a big shift in terms of financial education and literacy. And now I'm not talking about Islamic finance per se. I'm just talking about the young, the enabled, who go through education systems, who go into professional working environments, who have generally become more educated and more literate about the world of finance. That's just a byproduct of living within these within these countries, being exposed to the various ways of living and doing business, and so forth and so forth. When you look at a community, and I agree with the Muslim community specifically, I very much agree with Brother Chaaban in terms of his sort of overview of the way he sees things. I say that the young are more financially literate. They have access, especially in a digital age, to a lot of resources, and they've educated themselves either out of choice or being forced to do so, in terms of the ways and modes through which they can execute their financial affairs. If we compare and contrast that experience with maybe what we see in the Gulf, I'd say it's very similar. You have a generation that you have the elder generation who effectively their literacy levels are not like the young, especially like the millennials and Generation Z, who come through the YouTube, the Insta, the Facebook sort of mode of learning and absorbing that information. And I'd say that's quite prevalent. But again, with that, there comes various issues like, for example, crypto, wealth accumulation, get rich quick, all these sorts of things that I think that we're here to really delve into.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that note, thank you for that, Brother Chaaban.
No, all good.
Yeah, all good. So my next question was just on that note, Brother Sulaiman, and I'll go to Chaaban first. Are Muslims more prone to getting caught up in financial swindles, scams, and downright dodgy stuff than the rest of society?
Yeah.
Right? It seems like that sometimes. Maybe it's because we see the worst of our community up front sometimes and close, and we hear of these, you know, this guy ran off with millions of dollars, and this happened and that happened, and this crypto scheme went bust. Do segments of our community have a greater tendency towards this, or is it just like a small set of data points that maybe cause us to exaggerate that in our heads? Do you think this is just happening in other communities and we're just not sort of as aware of it?
I don't know, my opinion is that our community like to take risks, right? So whether they're informed or not, they do like to take risks. So what we found in our community, and there's been a number of these, whether an institution has been set up incorrectly without the right regulatory framework, and I am a man of compliance, that's what I do. The majority of my work is about compliance and putting the right regulations. And it's not to protect the investor, but it's really to ensure that there is prudency and there is process being followed, due process, in order to minimize the risk of something going wrong. Now, our community is notorious for dealing with cash, right? So when they hear about a particular scheme that says, okay, well, I'll take your cash and I'll do something with it and I'll give you a return. In fact, what they don't really realize is that it's a Ponzi scheme. So they're more than happy.
You have to explain that phrase.
Okay, what is a Ponzi scheme? Essentially, Ponzi scheme is where somebody takes your money, uses that money in order to provide a return. He distributes it to other people in order so they can actually go and bring their relatives and their cash to come back so that they can also receive some ridiculous return, 15, 20, 30%. But essentially, it's a pool of money that they're giving out to different people because word of mouth gets around very quickly, right? So when one person says, oh, I gave this guy 200,000 and guess what? He gave me back, 30% return. So then the word spreads around. They then have $100,000 under the mattress. They hand it over without understanding exactly what is that money doing. So in a regulatory framework, which is what I push our community always, make sure that there is a product disclosure statement, there is a target market determination, ask your advisor about these things. This is something that people with cash don't like to do, right? But they get burnt, right? And I've had people cry on my shoulder saying, I've lost hundreds and thousands of dollars, except to say to them, look, Allah bi'awid, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will, give the funds back to you. So the scams do exist. So these Ponzi's, they do exist, but especially in terms of those who do have cash funds. But there are ways to invest the cash funds, right, within a prudent and regulated environment. So, these people just need to go look for them. So I know of one scheme where people have lost $200 million in total to an individual who really, they didn't do their homework as to what was happening with that money. Another case as well, a corporation that provided finance, again, it went belly up. And I was telling to people, if organizations don't have an Australian Financial Services license, if they don't have a product disclosure statement, if they don't have a trustees that are supervising them, then do not depart with $1 of your funds. But as you said, some of our community don't listen, unfortunately, but as soon as they realize that the regulatory framework is there to protect them and their interests, that the sooner they realize they're going to reduce the risk of losing their money.
Yeah. And Brother Sulaiman, what's your experience from other parts of the world, on the same question?
What I would say is that, look, this all stems from a lack of financial education. If we look at Muslim communities and we look at Muslim societies, when it comes to financial education, not just Islamic financial education, but financial education in general, I think we can do a lot more in terms of enabling various sections of society to learn more. And once you effectively made that education available, especially in terms of best practice, disclosures, regulated activity, once you make that sort of information available and you make it a part and parcel of anyone's due diligence, I think what you'll find is that we'll become less prone and susceptible to these scams and swindles that do exist out there. Look, the way that I see things at the moment is that they're much better than they were, because what you have is you have a multitude of Islamic finance product and service available through very good institutions, regulated institutions that have the intellectual capacity and the financial sort of power to be able to do you good, do investors good. And we have to promote these things. We have to say that, look, they've been through a process, they've got their licenses, they've been regulated, and they do well. And I think as we go on this sort of transition, as we go on this sort of gestation period, whereby the Islamic finance industry, for all its problems and all its issues, it evolves and it develops. We have to look at education and literacy and looking at those school children, those university students that go through the process. We have to educate them because they're going to be a product of our upbringing.
Yeah. So what do we do then to better Brother Chaaban, to sort of help safeguard the community when it comes to this particular issue?
Yeah,
what's
sure.
your advice in a nutshell?
Sure.
When someone comes up and says there's a scheme going that promises X or Y return, what would you say people need to think about?
Yeah, look, it's just raising the awareness about the regulatory framework. That's the first thing that I say to people. Don't depart $1 unless you know what the regulatory framework that's in place, because that regulatory framework is going to help you. So, that's the first thing that I would say to people. Make sure that you've got some sort of protection, minimize the risk, because when you invest, right, there may be a chance that you're going to lose money. I mean, that's part of Islamic investing. You have to accept that you're going to make a gain. You have to accept that there's going to be a loss. However, if there is a regulated environment, when I say regulated, supervision by the government of what you're doing, then you are going to minimize the level of loss that you may incur by investing. So that's the first thing that I would tell everybody.
Yeah, okay. No, that makes sense. Now, one question that I wanted to ask was, I mean, there's a financial literacy question here.
Yeah.
But there's also a psychological question, I feel, when people hear these sorts of things, right? That there's something going on. What do you think is going through people's heads when they chuck their money at this sort of stuff? Like have you thought about that?
Trust. Yeah, trust. Islamically, we need to understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through many verses, yes, He says, Allah halal al-bay' and haram al-riba, and various other verses about giving due right. The Prophet ﷺ told us, when you get into a transaction, make sure everything's written to the effect, make sure that you're fully informed, you understand what you're getting yourself into. So this is something that our community says, okay, I'm going to give my money to this brother, I trust him, right? Trust on its own is not enough, regardless, whatever it is you're getting yourself into. You've got to make sure that you've got enough information documented, you've got enough literature to understand exactly what it is that you're getting yourself into. Great brother, great sister, they've got a great, investment scheme happening. And we love them for the sake of Allah, but it's really important to follow the sunnah of the Prophet. Make sure everything's written and make sure that both parties understand exactly what's happening to their money. Yeah, so financial literacy for me is extremely important. So I believe that sisters, and I mentioned it before, there's a big opportunity for sisters. Firstly, I find I ask more questions than brothers. Okay, so I'm the Chief Executive Officer of HealthBridge Investments, which invests in Pharmacy for Less brand. There's a bit of a plug there. But the sisters ask a lot of questions about what's going to happen with their money. So what happens from the time it goes into the fund? How is that then used? How is it then translated into the Pharmacy for Less business? So on one occasion, I love that. Now, the second thing is that sisters really need to understand what financial literacy is. They need to understand what their husbands are doing. Right? They need to have an understand because, and I don't keep this a secret, but things change in relationships. You get divorces, and you had that other program a couple of nights ago. You get divorces, maybe the husband dies potentially. You've got to understand, what does it mean for the will? What does it mean? The sexually transmitted debt, did the husband get in so much debt that it may not be manageable when the husband moves on? This is where the sisters really, I think, need to rise to the occasion and understand the importance of the finances within the household. Ask questions to the husband, find out what it means. Drawing up the will, understand that debts need to be paid off before the wasiyah, and then whatever's left over is going to be distributed. Make sure you have a will, because the will is a function of the financial literacy that will come about as a result of the distribution of the will. So for the sisters, this is extremely important, but they already ask questions more than the brothers, and I've got to commend them on that. So the brothers should really just focus a bit more on regulation, focus a little bit more on maybe diversifying some of their investments. And for the young people, look, you're smart, you're bright, don't jump into things unless you understand what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala want from us in terms of wealth and accumulation. And we can talk about that.
We'll definitely get to that right after this one.
But we've got to make sure that everybody has their level of financial literacy lifted, so that they can make informed decisions.
So on that then, how should Muslims view the concept of wealth and accumulation in this life, almost from a philosophical perspective? So as people who work in this area where you guys are seeing sums of money in the hundreds of millions, tens of millions, maybe even more than that. But philosophically, how do you view that view that and approach that sort of topic of like, you know, I guess even like the loftier sort of ideals about purpose in life and what we're here to do. And then not so much reconciling with the work you do, but sort of understanding it in light of that. What's your sort of take on it? How do you sort of think it through? What's your advice to people, especially when they're getting carried away with the concept of accumulation? And I'm asking you to engage, I guess, at a very deep level here, because sometimes when, you know, when people see increase, as Allah tells us in many places, the nafsi sort of inclination is to want more, and it's like something that can never be satisfied, right? How do you sort of reflect on that, and what have you seen of that sort of tendency in human beings in the work that you've done?
And everything really goes back to wealth, right? Everybody wants to be wealthy, and we are a lot more wealthier today than we're talking 20, 30 years ago. So it is important for us to approach wealth in the correct manner. So, you know, the Prophet ﷺ said that the mu'min, al-qawi, is, or the believer, the strong believer is better, and when he has the upper hand, and when he's stronger than when he's a weaker mu'min believer. So all of us should strive, you know, to increase our wealth. But we've got to understand that we've got to just make sure that everything we do is within the boundaries of the Sharia. Okay, it's okay to go and get halal returns, halal profits, but we've got to make sure that we're not going out and getting debts from the banks to the hill, because, you know, borrowing these days from a bank, we're talking $1 million plus in terms of debts. So all of us need to be aware of what happens with interest rates. It doesn't just impact us personally, but it impacts the entire economy. So everybody should just be aware of the environment that they're working with, so that they can manage accordingly and make the right decisions, because we do want wealth, you know, we do want to increase that. So, you know, I don't know if Brother Sulaiman has some feedback on that as well.
Absolutely, Brother Sulaiman. What are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, look, as you guys have rightly mentioned, that Islam encourages wealth creation. It's a very sort of implicit fact of our religion. It's a beautiful part of our religion. We've been given various rules, various tools through which to accumulate wealth, not excessively and not for the wrong reasons, but in a managed approach, because we all want to have a certain amount of wealth, a roof over our head, a comfortable life for ourselves and our families, and so forth. I think the important thing to consider here is effectively, look, we're in this digital age, we're in this Insta, Facebook is obviously past it, but Snapchat sort of age, whereby information is being consumed through influencers in very short sort of spaces of time, right? And what that does is that gives a very warped view of how to effectively accumulate and what to accumulate for. And it sort of clouds people's judgments in terms of the end objective. Should I be going after that car? Should I be saying that, look, I need to have these watches or these bags or whatever it is in a very short space of time? Is that what we should be sort of encouraging, or are we trying to encourage something else? Now, my view is that, especially amongst the young, because the young are the future, right? They are what we are going to leave behind, and they're our legacies, right? What we should be inculcating in them and encouraging them to do is effectively build strong foundations. Strong foundations aren't built on excessive debt and get rich quick schemes. Okay, if something sounds too good to be true, it usually is too good to be true. And we've been in this industry for a very long time. And when you get into double-digit types of returns, then that means that the risk is usually excessive, right? So strong, stable growth is something that I think should be yearned for. You can't get rich quick. You can't get rich overnight. You have to have a strong foundation and strong building blocks on which to go from. And I think that's really the thing for me in this day and age, is making sure that people who come out of university and who are in high school understand that they have tools at their disposal to prepare themselves for the future.
Yeah, so that was going to be my next question, actually. Like, what do Muslims need to know about investing? Yeah. And I guess you've covered a couple of things there, which is, firstly, there's no get rich quick, right? It's about slow, steady accumulation.
Yeah.
And got to be very conscious. I think of when people approach you with a certain investment idea, that you do your due diligence and you know certain things that you want to ask them. I guess one of the what I would perhaps touch upon, brothers, because we're sort of segueing nicely into into some of the more sort of juicy topics of what we see with regards to investments these days and some of the fads and so forth. Broadly speaking, what are the asset classes of investment that you commonly see people invest their wealth into? Let's say here, Brother Chaaban, we'll go to Brother Sulaiman in a second. So, just name them for the starters, because we're going to deep dive into each of them very quickly.
Sure.
What are they?
Sure. So you've got all these different sectors, the different classes of assets. So properties, everybody has an insatiable appetite for property. Everybody talks about property, especially in barbecues. So there's the share market, the stock market. So whether it be domestic or international, there are different types of share market entries. You've also got things like income-based investments, maybe not Sharia compliant ones, but they do exist. You've got your various cryptos, which we're going to be talking about later on. It exists, and people are investing in it. I'm not saying that I agree with it, and I'm not saying it's halal, but one of the reasons why all of these exist is so that people can diversify, not to put your eggs in one basket. You can invest in funds that invest in unlisted securities. So these are businesses, which is, quite okay. Or if you don't want to do any of your own property investing yourself, you can invest in a fund that in turn invests in property and construction. So, these are some of the things that you can invest in. But I just want to make one point though, about investing. That not a lot of people know about. We need to encourage investing. In Islam, hoarding, the concept of hoarding, it's haram, right? So you can't just leave money sitting under the mattress for years upon years. It doesn't make sense. One of the beauties of Ittisal al-Islamiyya, or the Islamic economic system, is that the money is turning over. So if you're not actually using it in your own business, then you're investing it. Regardless, money has to be productive. It's got to be invested in commodities. It's got to be invested in assets that have intrinsic value in them. And that in turn actually makes the economy turn over. So it creates employment, it creates opportunities, companies grow, so from that perspective, when Islam says you don't hoard, there's an underlying reason for it. It's because the economy keeps turning over. So investing is actually an excellent opportunity for everybody. You might win, you might gain, not win when we're not gambling, but you might gain, but you might lose it at the same time. So this is, one of the things about investing and looking at the different buckets of investments.
Yeah. We've had a question from the audience. Sister Nancy, thank you so much for the question. Just going to read that out. So basically, she's saying, it would be nice to hear about investments that have a small investment amount that can make a steady return. It's not fair that people have to put hundreds of thousands of dollars in. Is there something that one can invest, say a maximum of $10,000, for example, and allow a return to work as a steady income? I believe a lot of women in unstable marriages or relationships need a safety net, and I would agree that something like that is a beneficial and tempting option for them.
Yeah. So I guess that I need to put a disclaimer here. Everything that I say is general advice, and it cannot be considered personal advice. So for every single individual, what I say is quite different. So where you want to invest small amounts, you can use a fund. For example, the Health Bridge Capital Investment Fund, it's a minimum of $10,000. But that's because it's called a retail fund, right? There are other funds that are called wholesale funds, and they're the ones that you need hundreds and thousands of dollars. High net worth often invest in those things. This is what they call the high risk, high return types of funds. But they do exist. I mean, I'm sure you can find yourself a fund of some kind that will invest your money. If you can't find a Sharia compliant one, there are concepts like ethical funds, there are socially responsible funds, responsible investing funds. So, if you don't want to access an Islamic fund, because you're just not sure about it, there are the possibilities that you can look at another asset class, which is the ethical investment class. But because they all have small amounts, you can invest as little as $2,000, $5,000 or $10,000, but they do exist. Minimum of $10,000 does exist. But certainly you've got to understand that when you're investing, because your money is working for you in a particular business, and it's trying to be, being productive, then it's going to be hard for you to pull it out. So when you invest, you've got to understand that they're not a bank. Investing is not like a bank. You put your money in and you can take it out anytime you like. So you've got to give that money time in order to work for you. And when it works for you, then you'll reap the rewards of the investment gains. And then over time, you can decide whether you want to pull your money out or you want to add. But there are products out there, especially for women, especially because, as you said, divorce, whether it's wills, whatever it is, becoming financially literate means you need to now take the opportunity to take the jump and invest. But those products do exist.
Yeah. Brother Sulaiman, would you add anything to that?
Look, I just want to pick up on a couple of points that were mentioned. I think that diversified portfolio building is super important. When you effectively live let's say your net worth effectively is all in cash, that's not what the religion encourages. That's not the maqasid of our religion and where we come from, right? Yes, we should always have certain amounts of cash to dip into for rainy days and emergency reserve, but we have to ensure that money is circulating within an economy. We have to make sure that we don't hoard and that there is good circulation. The second point that I want to mention, and I think something that maybe is not as prevalent in Australia, but certainly what we see in the Gulf and in these parts of the world are fixed income, or specifically sukuk investments. The sukuk investments typically are in that sort of risk category between cash and real estate and equity, so to speak, or stocks and stock markets, whereby you have strong cash flows, or you have cash flows being generated on the back of effectively rights to own certain assets, or the cash flow from certain assets. And it's quite a deep and well diversified market here. We do see a lot of issuances from the GCC. We do see issuances from the in the Southeast Asian space, in Southeast Asia and Indonesia and Malaysia and so forth, and that's developed quite well. So when you consider that as part of an overall portfolio, you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. You're making sure that you have alternative and diversified income streams. I'm not sure. I'm sure that in Australia maybe you'll have access to some of these sukuk funds within international markets, and that might be something for the sister to also explore.
We don't. I'll just jump in, Sulaiman. So our Islamic finance framework, whether legal and otherwise, does not permit sukuks, to be issued here at the moment. There is all sorts of legislative issues stopping those sukuks, and it is said that if you've done a sukuk in Australia, then you've broken wide open the Islamic finance market. Unfortunately, fixed income products, the halal ones, they're almost non-existent here in Australia. So it sort of makes our opportunity for diversification really difficult. But we practitioners and product issuers, we're always working on ways that we can issue a sukuk. We believe that the first sukuk will probably be in conjunction with some Malaysian counterpart. I mean, they've been doing this for quite a while. But we on our own, with whatever resources and the legal framework that we have, unfortunately, we don't have the ability to set up sukuks as yet.
Yeah. So subhanAllah, that's fascinating. Yes.
Inshallah. And if you can help us from the Gulf, we're ready and willing. If our investors, especially if they've got $5,000 to $10,000, if they can have a safe 5 to 6% return, of course nothing is guaranteed in life, but I think there would be a market for that, especially in a diversified portfolio. Yeah.
Joe, what I was saying just a little while ago. Look, there is a there's a deep market for this sort of stuff, and maybe you guys can. I'm happy to share good practice and best practice going forward.
Sure.
Chaaban, is that your? Was that on your side, Brother Chaaban?
I think it was. Was it on yours?
No, I don't think it was mine.
Okay.
Yes, so I think
Right.
I'm not sure that's going to help, but anyways, we'll see. We'll plod along. We just had a small technical glitch, people on our side, but let's talk about cryptocurrencies, inshallah, as one emerging sort of investment fad. If we do end up having significant tech issues and have to wrap the episode up a bit earlier, then at least we will have gotten through this one. Brother Chaaban, at the highest level, what is a cryptocurrency in layman's terms? And why is it so controversial? In terms of mashayikh and scholars and so forth commenting that it's like gambling and people have no idea what they're doing. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, cryptocurrency comes from the word, so crypto itself comes from encryption, and encryption is, a function of secrecy. There was a guy who wrote a white paper, I think his name is Satoshi or something. You can correct me here, Sulaiman, anytime you like. But essentially he's created using what's Satoshi?
Nakamoto's.
Yes. Thank you. But essentially, cryptocurrency works in conjunction with block technology, also known as blockchain. So you've got all these various. It's almost a bit like an exclusive club. I mean, you're going to sense the negativity in the way that I'm going to introduce cryptocurrency to you. So cryptocurrency, essentially, what they consider to be is a digital currency. Okay, I don't believe that cryptocurrency is a digital currency. So what it is, something that sits in the World Wide Web. It's powered by computers, the energy from the computers. People can actually, so the actual blockchain itself does its own minting. It creates coins, and people jump on board so that they can buy a share of these particular coins. They have miners, and these particular miners will make sure that everything's reconciled and that there is a finite number of coins in the system at any one point in time. So essentially it's this digital, what they call digital currency. I believe there's a lot of marketing behind it. I believe there are some companies who are holding massive amounts of these things. So I think it's controlled largely by these major corporations. And when people like Elon Musk, when they put $1 billion under the name of Tesla within cryptocurrency, it moves. So in my opinion, I don't believe cryptocurrency is a currency at all. If you look at currency, it needs to have intrinsic value. It's got to be backed by an asset. It's got to be backed by, potentially it needs to be exchanged for something else that is a thing or something that is real. But money in Islam is very well defined. We've had, the fiat, monetary currency, where, for example, you've got paper money, but that paper money is also backed by, currency that is actually being endorsed by governments. So even under the Islamic State, the dinar and the dirham were both backed by gold and silver, respectively, depending on the portion itself. So I don't believe it's a currency. People call it cryptocurrency. I don't believe it's a currency. So is it an asset class? Some people are starting to say that it's an asset class, but it really is, in my opinion, not an asset class. I believe there is no underlying productive use of this particular asset class. You invest in property, the property is working for you. You invest in a share market, the company that you've invested in, it's doing something for you. Cryptocurrency is nothing more than a platform, what they call decentralized cryptocurrency. When they say decentralized, it's regulated by the internet. So there's nobody really regulating it. So everybody is jumping on board for one reason only. It's the expectations. It's the expectation that it's a speculative expectation that their money or whatever the value they put in is going to go up in value. So that in itself, in my opinion, is massive. It's gambling.
How's it different from the stock market? That's the obvious question you probably get a lot.
So the stock market itself, you're actually buying a physical asset, right? So, and then your money is going towards the company itself that you're investing in, the limited company on the ASX. You're actually choosing to invest in a segment of the market. For example, it could be property, it could be the mining, but that's where your money is working. You are investing in an area that you think, based on fundamentals, they're going to do well, and you're going to do well. As they grow, the value of your shares also grow. But there is an intrinsic value in the commodity that they're producing and they're selling. In cryptocurrency, there's none of that. It's throw your money into this, right, and hope through speculation that it's going to go up. So from my perspective, I think the only one reason that you get into is to make money. And I also think it's an exclusive club. Like, you've really got to sign up. You've got to get in there. Money should be about, proper currency should just be about trading, buying and selling. It should be very quick. You know, you want to convert Australian dollars to US dollars, it should be done very quickly. But it takes time. In the whole cryptocurrency world, it takes time. And because it's not regulated, you might have haram means also participating. But then again, you'll have haram everywhere, whether it's anti-money laundering, you know, whether it's money laundering, whether it's gambling, whatever it is, there is that aspect that cryptocurrency can actually encompass haram activities. So all in all, I don't believe it's a legal tender. I don't believe it's regulated. Proper money and proper currency is endorsed and issued by the state, or it should be issued by a government. At the moment, everybody's jumping on the bandwagon because for them, it's a product. And for me, potentially, it's a product. At the end of the day, it's an exclusive product. But, and I'm sure Sulaiman's got to have a lot to say about this as well, because, you know, he's going to share the opposite view of me. When you walk into a casino, right, you exchange your money for chips. And then those chips are the ones that win you money on the blackjack table or one of those things. But take those chips out of the casino and you can't use them, right? What else? Another example. You go to Disneyland and you get tokens. Again, you exchange your money for tokens. Those tokens can only be used inside Disneyland, whether it be for food, whether it be for having fun, whether it be for riding on the roller coaster. But again, it's only exclusive to those people. And that's why I say about cryptocurrency. You want to be part of that, you know, you want to be part of that expectation and the sensationalism of, you know, the abrupt increase or the abrupt drop, then that is an exclusive club for you to be a part of. But in my opinion, there is no Islamic basis. And of course, you know, we can talk for hours on this, but there are some ulama that say potentially if it's a product and Islam says it's not haram specifically, then it may be permissible. I think I've said enough. Sulaiman, over to you.
Let's go. Let's hear this.
Thank you. Look, as you mentioned, I think my view is a little bit different to yours, and we can go for a very long time discussing and debating. I think, look, if we rewind and look at what a cryptocurrency is, I think for me, the answer is in the name, a currency. Now, when you look at what a currency is, and you look at the main features of a currency, ultimately, it's what a group of people, a specific group of people, assign value to something, for that something to be then treated as a currency. For me, when I break it down in my mind, that's the way that I look at it. Okay, that this asset, whether it's tangible or untangible, represents a store of wealth. And where can I use that store of wealth, and how can I effectively have access to that store of wealth to perform transactions in the real world? If we talk about where it can be used, like for example, Australian dollar, I can't use Australian dollar in Qatar, so Australian dollar is of no desire to anyone on the street in Qatar to be able to buy my iftar today. So I think there's various things that we can talk about. For me, cryptocurrencies really solve. And when I say crypto, it's a very broad thing. There's hundreds and thousands of coins out there, so we have to look at each one of them and look at the objective of that coin, and the real world problem that it solves. If we take Bitcoin, if we take Ripple, if we take Ether, if we look at their use cases, and there are various white papers written by the founders about the use of that currency, I think that there is a lot of benefit that can be extracted from them. So to give you a specific crypto, if we look at Ripple, like if I want to remit money to you today in Australia, I have to go to my bank, who will then have to contact their Nostro provider, or their Australian bank provider, bank account provider in Australia, and that Australian bank provider will then have to speak to your bank, Brother Chaaban or Brother Faraz, and that whole process in 2022 will take 2 to 3 days. through blockchain technology, that process is reduced to a couple of seconds to remit funds. And for me, when I talk about use cases and I look at use cases, that's effectively what crypto offers us. It offers us an ability to work within the 21st century in efficient ways, to use the technology that's available to us to do various financial tasks, banking tasks, to remit money, to pay for goods and services. So I'm happy to go into more specifics, but my opinion is probably a little bit different to where Brother Chaaban stands on this. One final point that I will sort of say.
Sorry, just before you move on, Sulaiman, sorry to interrupt you there. So you mentioned the whole process about bank to bank, but see, this is the thing. Firstly, what's in the bank is currency, which is endorsed by governments and is regulated by governments. So all governments issue a certain. All governments. So it's the Australian government endorses the currency which the banks use. So when it's going from one bank to the other, you've got a regulated process, a currency-based process that is totally regulated, and government should be the ones who regulate currency. Right now, you've gone from a framework to something that's not regulated whatsoever. You're going to rely on the World Wide Web in order to transmit funds from me to you. There's no regulation there. We're talking about pockets of data, which could be there one day, and then your data file could be gone the next. I mean, there's all sorts of risks which are not guaranteed by any government body.
So if I could just say that the one of the reasons why Bitcoin was developed is effectively to break away from the stranglehold of fiat currency and the issues that decentralization comes with, right? Decentralize and move the power away from a global elite to a communal framework. And Bitcoin, for example, partly solves that issue, right? Because you have the problem of double spending, you have the problem of inflation, and we see where inflation is today, where your money is no longer worth what it was a month ago or 2 months ago, right?
All right, but even on inflation, Sulaiman, even on inflation, what's driving the curve to just go up? I mean, isn't that just inflationary or speculative increases? So inflation is intrinsic within the cryptocurrency model in itself. There's no reason why.
There's no reason why it should be going up and down like this, except for speculative inflationary reasons. I can't imagine anything else driving it.
I don't deny that there is a lot of volatility in cryptocurrencies. You just have to look at any graph to see the volatility in any currency, and you don't have that in normal fiat currencies. But I don't think that's reason enough to say it's not to be treated as a currency. I'm not saying it's an asset class that we should go and invest in and invest in hugely. I'm saying that there are use cases through these cryptocurrencies that solve real world problems.
Yeah.
I think would it be fair to say that part of this is a bit of a philosophical discussion? In the sense of, on the one hand, you almost have to, and I'm not making a value judgment here, but for the benefit of the viewers, the way I sort of see it is, on the one hand, there's these, let's just call them Western governments, who for a long time have sort of been the gatekeepers of the international fiat currency system. You almost have to take them as a given in order to sustain the argument that other people who are looking to disrupt perhaps the way currency models work should not be allowed to do so. So there's that argument that what's neutral about these governments anyway, that they should be the ones that are allowed to be those, as you call them, sort of the governing figures or the ones in whose hands the compliance lies, right? And on the other, there's like, well, okay, fine, if you remove them, then there's going to be this crazy sort of runaway inflation with this thing, and it's not actually fair, because while it starts off with like an anti-elite sentiment at the core of it, what we've seen happen, for instance, with Bitcoin and with some other currencies, is that the value will appreciate so quickly that it sort of takes us back to that problem of it's in the hands of a few who are actually able to afford some of this. But I guess on the flip side, it would be that doesn't stop people from investing in it at very small quantities, right? So now you, instead of buying an entire Bitcoin, you buy 0.000 something percent. What's wrong with that? Brother Sulaiman, I might start with you first.
I don't know.
You mentioned there, Faraz, in terms of, especially what I see nowadays is a lot of people putting a lot of amount of their net worth into crypto, and I'm not an advisor of that. Okay, I think that look, you should only be exposed to crypto in a very small portion of your portfolio. That's not where the majority of your assets should be, because as we've discussed, right, there's a huge amount of price volatility, and some of these cryptocurrencies, not all of them, some of them, what are they? What objective are they serving? There's a lot of scams out there. There's a lot of uncertainty about the objectives of some of these and the nefarious sort of activities that happen, which I won't go into. There's a lot of that occurs there. All I'm saying is that look, a lot of these things, a lot of these currencies solve problems. And they shouldn't just be pushed off the table and classed as being unpermissible just because we see speculation. I mean, you can speculate using cash, right? I can go into a casino and I can speculate using cash. That's not allowed, right?
But with crypto, you speak to everybody who pumps money into cryptocurrency. They're telling you they're going to make a lot of money. They're going to be millionaires overnight.
That's the reality. I think we have to accept that reality. There may be benefits, as you're saying, okay, but I still have an issue. Governments exist to protect the layman, man and woman, right? And whatever currency they have. Crypto is at another level. And that's why I keep saying it's an exclusive level. But the reality is, I'd say 99% are pumping money into it in the hope that they can make money out of it. And that in itself, that's the Islamic issue that I have with.
So let me come to what I think is the crux of the issue. Fascinating discussion, brothers, beautiful stuff. But let me come to what I think is the crux of the issue. So Brother Chaaban, you're sort of, and Brother Sulaiman, I want you to engage on this particular part of it, right? I think the way I sort of sense what Brother Chaaban is saying is that if it's a learned investor who knows what they're doing, right? Who sort of judges on the basis of trends and what they think might happen to the asset and sees it as a value generating opportunity.
I still disagree with that.
Okay, still disagree with that.
Because I still think, I'm still saying
at the core
it's not a commodity.
Okay, cool.
It's not a commodity, it's not a currency. It's neither of the two.
Okay. Yeah. So for you, even if you're educated and blah blah blah
Correct.
blah. Okay.
I wouldn't go there.
Okay, got it. So that's just a fundamental disagreement on the nature of what a currency is, whether this is a valid form of asset, essentially.
That's right.
But Sulaiman, let me ask you this, right? The reality is, in our community, at least here in Australia, this is our experience, and I would say this is probably the experience everywhere, frankly, around whether it's the East or the West, that for a lot of people, this thing is just a runaway train. It's a fad, right? And at least I see in my circles, and as I think everyone would see, that there are a lot of people who haven't the slightest clue about investments generally, who are throwing money at this, right? Now, I want to ask this two ways, right? And I wanted to actually open up a final part of the conversation today regarding stock investments as an asset class. Brother Sulaiman, do you have any issue with a layperson who's got absolutely no idea when it comes to cryptocurrency, but because his friend tells him that this is the next get-rich scheme, he chucks money at it?
Yeah.
Do you think Islamically there's a problem there when it comes to issues of uncertainty, gambling, etc.? Do you think there is an inherent problem there?
Yeah. Good question.
I think, look, the issue is education, right? Is that we always, whether it's finance, whether it's something else, right? We have to make sure as Muslims that we're comfortable with the choices that we make. Okay, so if my friend tells me that I need to pray 7 times a day or I need to pray 3 times a day, then am I comfortable with my friend giving me that advice, right? Who is this friend? If I go to a doctor and he tells me to invest in a cryptocurrency, who is this doctor? And with all due respect, why is he giving me that advice? So as individuals, we have to make sure that we're comfortable with the advice that we're given, and we understand the decisions that we're making and the choices that we're taking. And that again goes back to what we were talking about earlier in the show, right? In terms of education and literacy. There is no get rich quick. Okay, there is nothing that will make you a millionaire overnight. If you're a billionaire and you spend and you lose, then maybe you become a millionaire, right? But that's not part of what we're talking about here. It's slow and stable growth. And when you look at the stock market, I think very similar sort of things apply. We have to understand where our money is going, right? We have to make sure that we understand the company that we're investing in. And are they generating return from taking excessive amounts of debt? Do they sit on cash that they park with banks and park into investment products with which they're generating return? So there's all these sorts of questions that must be answered before we make an investment.
But these are fundamentals. These are fundamentals.
Well.
Crypto doesn't have fundamentals. These are fundamentals of an organization.
So I think that's the point where there's a clear philosophical, I guess, disagreement between you, which we're probably not going to resolve today. But it's good to know that that's where fundamentally the issue is. Now, what I want to bring the discussion to, Brother Chaaban, is to this now analogous situation to what I just described on the crypto side of things, where you've got this asset class of stocks, right? And in your view, philosophically, it's okay because it's something real that you're investing in. But again, I am that investor that has no idea, right? Really, I couldn't tell a stock from a pig, right? And I am chucking my money at it because I think it can help me get rich. I have no idea. I've not done any research. I'm financially completely illiterate. Is there a difference?
Okay, so stocks, there are two ways, okay? There's day traders. So day traders speculate, right? So day traders, in my opinion, they're haram, right? Because they're taking a punt at something that's going to make them money, get rich quick. But if you're giving somebody else advice, stocks and the share markets generally is perceived to be a long term, minimum 5 to 10 years. This is why we put our money in superannuation. You're going to make money. These companies need time to grow. Some of them may even fail, right? There are some companies who have failed, technology companies, they've failed miserably. But you've got to do your homework. So if your homework says this company is going to do well and it doesn't, so be it. It fails. But you can say to somebody, you can put $5,000 in something, providing you leave it there for 5 to 10 years. Because it's about wealth accumulation. It's about wealth generation, not get rich. Cryptocurrency, on the other hand, is about everyone's getting in it because all this decentralization, and you can sugarcoat it any which way you like. But the reality is it's about get rich quick. Because one day they're up 30%, the next day they're down 40%.
And today was a bit of a wipeout, wasn't it? $250 billion.
And they are looking at the price every minute of every hour. So I would say, similar to Sulaiman, I'd say make sure you get your advice from the right person who knows about stocks, and make sure you throw it. So yes, I'd say throw it on a share, but make sure you take a long-term view and make sure that it's a long-term, option. My earphones is dying.
I would go one step further. I would say don't just throw it on a share. You'd have to understand what that share is, what that stock is, and see where that fits as part of your portfolio, and either apply the same to the crypto space.
Last point of discussion, brothers, and Brother Sulaiman, if you lose us, it's on account of technological battery-related issues, so do bear with us, and just sort of hang in there for the time being. I want to discuss the property market, the final asset class that I wanted to cover quickly. Brother Chaaban, Australia is, as with some of the rest of the Western world, in a ridiculous situation when it comes to property. And we sort of all broadly know the context, so I'm not going to spell that out, right? But in your view, philosophically, right, are Muslims in a conundrum when it comes to property? Is the idea that rent money is dead money something that we need to revisit? Because that's the thing that underlies a lot of Muslims, and almost like being bought into this sort of 30-year plan of, I've got to save, I've got to put a deposit, I've got to look for which Islamic finance institution I can get money from, buy a house, get into a mortgage. Is that philosophically a bad idea, fundamentally, do you think? Or is it understandable, given that we've built lives here now?
Okay, so property prices are ridiculous, and not just affecting Muslims, Australian Muslims, and I probably speak all over the world. Property prices are ridiculously high because of the low interest rate environment. But what we're going to see down the track is when the reserve banks of all the world start to increase interest rates, you're going to find corrections to these property prices. You're going to find that some people will default on some of their debts. Both husbands and wives are both working these days in order to keep up with the repayments. So, and then if you look at rent, it's a function of property prices. So you're borrowing $1 million, it's going to cost you 3%. You need the tenant to help you pay that off. So even renting property these days is going to cost you $650, $700 a week. Again, you need husbands and wives to work in order to pay the rent. But we need roofs over our heads. This is the reality. So if you can come up with a plan in order to buy a property, both husband and wives, make sure that you have so philosophically, aim to buy something. Don't wait. But again, this is only if you need it. If you're being kicked out of rental properties, you need to buy a house, buy it. If you can wait until there is a correction, because there's talk of 3 or 4 interest rate rises, in the next 12 months, if you can wait for the prices to come down, then so be it. But I think property is probably the most valuable asset that we have in Australia. It has a roof over our heads. The rental market is not ideal, but at the same time, it's halal. There's nothing wrong with renting, because ultimately, the best property that we can ever get is the one in the hereafter.
Yeah.
Right? So that property will be given to you for free. It'll be given to you as a gift. So, we should make sure that anything we do in this world is make sure that it's halal. We stay away from banks, period. If we can go to these Islamic institutions, that would be my advice. Get loans from Islamic institutions. But more importantly, do not put your akhirah at risk. Don't go and get anything haram regardless, because the akhirah is everything to strive for, right? Especially from a halal haram perspective. Philosophically, aim to buy your property if you can. I know the prices are crazy, but the reality is I think they're going to remain with population growth as well. When people start moving into Australia, the prices are going to remain. But I think there is going to be a correction of about 10 to 15%. Again, do your research, but I do value people owning their own property.
Yeah. Okay. Obviously, there's a whole Pandora's box about Islamic finance itself, which I'm sure you're very aware of, given some of your networks in the community and family relationships and so on. So we will attack that another time, inshallah. And I don't mean that literally, but it's a topic to discuss, I suppose. Brothers, very conscious of time. It has been an hour. SubhanAllah, we could talk about these issues forever, but I did want to wrap up. Thank you so much. I mean, that's been a fantastic discussion on very, very important issues. Brother Sulaiman, are you still with us?
Yes, I'm still here.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Sulaiman. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Absolute pleasure to have you, brother. And we've just gone out of power in my ear, just at the wrong time. But Jazakallah khair. It's been an absolute pleasure and honor to have you, brother. Thank you so much. And we look forward to discussing with you again.
Inshallah.
Thank you so much, brother. Appreciate it.
Chaaban, Jazakallah khair. That was fantastic.
Yeah.
A topic we haven't discussed often, but hopefully, with these sorts of conversations, we look forward to exploring a lot more. So thank you so much for joining us in the studio.
Happy to help, inshallah.
Thank you so much. And brothers and sisters, Jazakumullah khair for joining us. It's been a fascinating discussion. Hopefully, you've all found it productive and useful. We look forward to bringing some of the highlights to you in some of our highlight packages in the upcoming days and weeks, and hope that it's shed some important light on these issues and that people benefit from the conversation that we had. Obviously, we haven't resolved everything, especially the cryptocurrency issue. Very, very interesting discussion. Some complicated philosophical questions at the root of it in terms of what is currency and so forth. But we hope that gave you some food for thought and lines of inquiry that you can pursue in your own time, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan once again for joining us. We are in day 10, night 11 of Ramadan. The rest of the month still awaits us. We hope you can join us for the next episode this Thursday, which Sister Reem will be hosting with our esteemed Sister Dalia Ayub from the community on the topic of social media influences and digging into that quite controversial topic. So that should be a lot of fun. So that's our next topic this coming Thursday. So be sure to join us if you can, inshallah. And in the meantime, all the best with your Ramadan worship. We hope it is a fantastic month for you and your family, and we look forward to joining you again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.